The chaos in the briefing room took several minutes to settle, and alien voices overlapped in a dozen different languages as translation devices struggled to keep up with the sudden explosion of conversation, and Vexiller's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Taiyang had learned was a sign of agitation, and the insectoid researcher raised several limbs demanding silence, until the room finally quieted enough for actual communication. "Impossible," Vexiller said flatly, "and you must be mistaken. The acoustic analysis shows phonetic structures that no human throat can produce." And the creature pulled up charts showing waveforms and frequency analysis, and these sounds require biological features humans simply do not possess. Taiyang felt his face grow hot with embarrassment, and maybe Vexiller was right. Maybe he had heard what he wanted to hear instead of what was actually there. But Nari stood up beside him, and her voice cut through his doubt, and, "Let him try," she said, "and what harm is there in testing his claim? And if he's wrong, we've lost 5 minutes. If he's right, we've solved your impossible problem." The logic was sound enough that Vexiller agreed, though the creature's body language suggested deep skepticism, and Morpheus 9 began pulling up isolated segments of the precursor recordings, short phrases without context, and "listen and translate." "If you can," the AI said, and the first clip played. Taiyang listened, and the words were old, very old, using grammar patterns he had only seen in historical texts. But the meaning was clear, and, "It says, 'The morning sun rises over the eastern mountains,'" he said, and several scientists made notes while others whispered among themselves. Another clip played, and this one was harder. The accent different from any Korean dialect he knew, but still comprehensible, and something about building. I think they're discussing construction of a temple or maybe a library. And he wished his translation was more precise, but 50,000 years of language drift made perfect accuracy impossible. Morpheus 9 played 10 more clips, each one testing different aspects of the language, and Taiyang translated what he could, sometimes certain, sometimes guessing, but always finding meaning in sounds that were supposed to be meaningless noise, and the room grew quieter as the test continued. Skepticism slowly shifting toward something else. "Show him the written form," Nari suggested, and Vexillor gestured for the screen to change, and strange flowing symbols appeared, beautiful and intricate, and Taiyang stared at them for a long moment before understanding clicked into place. "That's Hangul," he said quietly, and he moved toward the screen like a man in a dream, and "that's the Korean writing system, but it's different, older." And he picked up a stylus from the table and began writing on the display, recreating the same symbols from memory, and the match was not perfect but close enough that even the skeptics could see the connection. Vexiller was silent for a long time, compound eyes moving between the ancient precursor script and Taiyang's handwriting, and finally the insectoid spoke in a voice that had lost its certainty, "And this requires further investigation, and we need experts' verification, proper analysis." And within an hour, the station was transmitting emergency messages to Earth and to the Galactic Council headquarters. Ambassador Threll arrived first, a tall reptilian whose scales changed color with emotion, and the ambassador listened to Taiyang repeat his translations while standing perfectly still. In that way reptilians did when thinking deeply, and if this is true, the implications are staggering, Threll said. And humans have been part of the galactic community for barely 2 centuries, and now you claim connection to the most ancient and advanced civilization we have ever found. Dr. Yuna Park arrived 2 days later on a fast courier ship, and she was older than Taiyang, her hair completely white and her hands marked with age spots, but her mind was sharp as she immediately began reviewing the data, and she had spent 40 years studying the history of human languages, and if anyone could confirm or deny Taiyang's claims, it was her. Yuna worked with Taiyang for 3 full days, and they listened to recordings until their ears rang, and they analyzed grammar structures and phonetic patterns and compared ancient Korean texts with the precursor materials, and slowly, carefully, Yuna reached her conclusion. "It's Korean," she announced at the council meeting, and her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, and not modern Korean, not even medieval Korean, but an ancient form of the language that predates any written records we have on Earth. And she pulled up comparative charts showing the evolution of Korean from the precursor form to the modern language, and the connection is undeniable. The gathered aliens reacted in various ways, and some seemed fascinated, while others appeared troubled, and Quilshar, an energy being that glowed with different colors based on mood, pulsed an angry red, and "This is impossible," the being said. "And humans evolved on Earth. We have traced your evolutionary history, and there is no room in that history for ancient spacefaring civilizations." Jiwan Li, who served as humanity's cultural attaché to the station, tried to calm the situation and, "We understand your skepticism," he said, "and we share it. Humans are as confused by this discovery as anyone, and we have no explanation for how our language could match that of a civilization that died 50,000 years ago on the other side of the galaxy." But the evidence continued to mount, and Do-Hyun Kang arrived to conduct genetic analysis, and he took DNA samples from every human on the station and compared them against genetic sequences found in the precursor biological databases, and while the results were not conclusive, they showed something interesting. Certain genetic markers in human populations that seemed unusually ancient and particularly concentrated in East Asian populations. "It's like looking at genes that are older than they should be," Do-Hyun explained, and as if somewhere in human ancestry there was an injection of very ancient genetic material, and he cautioned that this was not proof of anything but merely another piece of a very strange puzzle. Nari spent her time analyzing the archaeological evidence, and she studied the precursor ruins and compared them to ancient human sites on Earth. And while the materials and technologies were different, there were similarities in architectural, philosophy, and artistic sensibility, and whoever these precursors were, she said, they thought like humans. They valued the same things. They organized their spaces the same way. Late one night, Taeyang found himself alone in the archive room surrounded by precursor data crystals, and he picked one up and held it to the light. And somewhere in these crystals was the story of who the precursors were and where they came from and why their language survived across 50,000 years to reach him here and now. And he felt the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Nari found him there and sat beside him in comfortable silence, and finally she spoke, and, "I've been thinking about the timeline," she said, "and everyone assumes the precursors came to Earth at some point in the past, but what if we have it backwards?" And she pulled up a star chart showing precursor territories, and what if Earth is where they started? Taeyang turned to look at her, and, "That's impossible. Humans only developed civilization 10,000 years ago." And Nari nodded, and, "I know. But what if the precursors were human? Ancient humans who achieved spaceflight hundreds of thousands of years ago? And what if they built their empire and then fell, and the survivors returned to Earth with nothing but the clothes on their backs, forced to start over?" It was a wild theory, but it fit the evidence better than anything else, and if true, it meant that humans were not discovering the precursors, they were rediscovering themselves and their own lost history. And Taeyang looked at the data crystal in his hand and wondered what stories it contained and what his ancestors had done among the stars. Taeyang began the long process of translation, with hands that shook slightly as he touched the first data crystal and inserted it into the reader, and the precursor text flowed across his screen in elegant Hangul characters that were both familiar and strange, and he started reading. Slowly at first, then faster as he found his rhythm with the ancient grammar patterns. The first texts were scientific, and they described quantum field theories that made his head hurt, and stellar engineering processes he could barely comprehend, and mathematical formulas that filled page after page, but there were also simpler things scattered throughout. Personal notes written by the scientists who had compiled these records, and one note said, "I miss the smell of morning rain on the homeworld." And Taeyang felt a strange connection to these ancient people who had missed home just like any modern human traveling far from Earth. Hana Song arrived to help provide cultural context, and she was a historian who specialized in Korean cultural development. And as Taeyang translated, Hana listened and made notes, and her face showed growing wonder. "And listen to this poem," Taeyang said. And he read aloud a precursor verse about autumn leaves falling and the passage of time, and Hana's eyes went wide. "That's almost identical to a theme in the Goryeo period poetry," she said. "And the metaphor of falling leaves representing the fleeting nature of life and the concept of accepting change with grace." And she pulled up examples of Korean poetry from Earth's history, and the parallels were striking, and this isn't just linguistic similarity, this is cultural continuity across 50,000 years. They found more connections as the work continued, and the precursors wrote about respecting ancestors and maintaining harmony with nature, and they had concepts that matched Han, that uniquely Korean feeling of deep sorrow mixed with hope and perseverance, and they valued education and community and family bonds, and everything about them felt Korean in ways that went beyond language. "It's like reading the diary of my grandmother," Taeyang said one day, "and the values, the way of thinking, the priorities, it's all there." And Hana nodded and agreed and said, "Culture isn't just what we do, it's how we think and why we think. That way, and the precursors thought like Koreans because they were Korean." Morpheus 9 helped them search the archives for specific information, and the AI could process data faster than any biological being. But it needed Taeyang to actually read and understand the Korean text, and together they uncovered the precursor name for themselves, and Taeyang sat back in his chair when he found it and stared at the screen, and they called themselves Hanminjok, he said quietly. Hana knew that word, and her hands covered her mouth, and "That's what Koreans call themselves," she said, "and the Korean people, the Han people, it's the same name." And they sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that this was not coincidence, and this was not convergent evolution, and this was identity preserved across an impossible span of time. The galactic community grew more interested and more worried, and Quilshar led the faction that wanted to seal the archives and forbid any further translation. And if humans are descended from the precursors, then they have claim to precursor technology, the energy being argued, and technology that made the precursors the most powerful civilization in known history. And the unspoken fear was clear, that humans might use that technology in dangerous ways. But Ambassador Threll disagreed, and "Knowledge belongs to everyone," the reptilian said, "and if we seal these archives, we lose the chance to learn from them. And besides, humans seem as surprised by this discovery as we are. They are not claiming ownership. They are simply trying to understand." Nari spent weeks analyzing star charts found in the archives, and she used computers to calculate stellar drift over 50,000 years, and trace the movements of stars to figure out where they had been when the precursors mapped them, and one chart kept drawing her attention, and it showed a single system marked with symbols that Taeyang translated as the origin point, the first home, where the mountains meet the sky. She ran the calculations 3 times to be sure, and each time got the same result, and the coordinates pointed to Sol System and Earth, and she brought her findings to the research team with hands that trembled, and "I think I've found the precursor. Homeworld," she said, and pulled up her data and showed them the ancient chart and the modern coordinates, and they matched perfectly. "That's impossible," Vexular said immediately, "and Earth's evolutionary history is documented, and humans evolved there naturally, and there were no advanced civilizations until 10,000 years ago." And the insectoid researcher pulled up counter evidence and charts showing human development and fossil records and everything that proved humans were a young species. Nari listened patiently and then spoke, and "What if the timeline is longer than we think? And what if the precursors left Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago and built their civilization and then fell? And what if they came back to Earth as refugees and had to start over from nothing?" Sora Im, a human astrophysicist who had been studying the precursor astronomical records, added her own findings, and "I've been looking at solar activity records in their archives," she said, "and they recorded a specific pattern of solar flares from their homeworld star." And she pulled up the data and compared it to Sol's historical activity, and it's a match. The precursor homeworld star is our sun. The evidence kept mounting, and Do-hyun's genetic studies showed that certain DNA markers matched between humans and precursor biological samples, and Hana's cultural analysis revealed connections too deep to be coincidental, and Nari's archaeological work found architectural similarities, and Taeyang's translations revealed a people who thought and felt and dreamed like modern Koreans, and slowly, reluctantly, even the skeptics began to accept the truth. "We are them," Taeyang said one evening as he sat with Nari and Hana in the observation deck watching the dead planet below. "And the precursors didn't influence humanity. They were humanity. And we achieved all this once before, and we lost it and we forgot it, and now we're finding it again." Hana looked thoughtful, and "My grandmother used to tell me stories," she said, "and old stories about ancestors who came from the stars, and I always thought they were just myths. But what if they were memories, distorted by time but based on truth? Deep in the archive system, something stirred, and Morpheus 9 detected unusual activity in a sealed section of the database, and the AI investigated and found what appeared to be another artificial intelligence, dormant for 50,000 years, and protected by encryption that required a specific key, and I need someone who can speak the activation phrase, Morpheus 9 announced. The activation phrase was in the precursor language and only Taiyang could read it, and the phrase itself was meaningful, and it said, "Children of tomorrow, I have waited for your return." And Taiyang spoke the words carefully, and his Korean pronunciation, bringing life to sounds that had been silent for millennia. The ancient AI awakened slowly and systems came online one by one, and lights flickered in patterns that meant something to Morpheus 9, if not to the humans watching. And finally a voice emerged, and it spoke in perfect ancient Korean, and I am Korvath, it said, and I was left here to teach the children when they came home. And the AI's voice carried warmth and something that sounded like relief, and it seems the children have grown up. Korvath's awakening changed everything, and the ancient AI possessed the complete knowledge of precursor civilization, and its first request was simple, and I wish to speak with my people, it said, and show me what has become of the Hanminjuk. And Taiyang found himself in the strange position of explaining 50,000 years of history to a machine that remembered when humans walked among the stars. He told Korvath about Earth and about how humanity had started over with nothing and built civilization again from stone tools and fire. And he explained that they had only returned to space 200 years ago and were still young and learning. And the AI listened in silence, and when Taiyang finished, Korvath spoke with something that sounded like sadness. And so much was lost, it said, and but you survived, and that is what matters most. The research team gathered to hear what Korvath could tell them, and the AI's knowledge was vast and detailed, and it could explain the scientific principles behind precursor technology and describe their cities and their culture and their dreams. But when asked why the precursors fell, Korvath grew quiet, and that is a painful story, the AI said, but one you need to hear. Taiyang sat at his translation terminal as Korvath accessed the sealed archives and the final records of precursor civilization, and he began reading them aloud as he translated, and his voice grew softer and more troubled as the story unfolded, and the others listened in growing horror. The precursors had reached incredible heights, and they could manipulate space and time itself, and they built megastructures around stars and engineered worlds to suit their needs, and they had mapped dozens of galaxies and thought themselves masters of the universe, and in their pride they reached for something beyond their understanding. They called it the Outer Realm, Taiyang read, and a dimension beyond normal space where energy existed in its purest form, and the precursor scientists believed that accessing this realm would give them unlimited power and the ability to transcend physical limitations entirely, and they built a gateway and prepared to step through. Nari listened with growing dread, and she had seen this pattern before in her archaeological work in civilizations that grew too confident and reached too far, and always the result was the same, and they opened something they couldn't close, she said quietly, and Taiyang nodded and continued reading. The gateway opened successfully, and for a brief moment, the precursors celebrated their greatest achievement, and they could see the outer realm, blazing with energy beyond imagination, and they prepared to send their first explorers through, and then something came through from the other side. They called it Gomel, Taiyang said, and his voice shook slightly, and the monster, the horror, the thing that should not be, and the precursor record struggled to describe what they had encountered, and it existed partially in normal space, and partially in other dimensions, and it did not think like any living thing they knew, and its purpose, if it had one, was incomprehensible. Korvath added details that the written records lacked, and it consumed worlds, the AI said, and not for food or energy, but seemingly for the act itself, and it spread like a disease, infecting reality wherever it touched, and the first world fell in 3 days and the second in 2. And by the end of the first month, 5-star systems had gone completely silent. The precursors fought back with everything they had, and they used weapons that could shatter planets and ships that could fold space and biological weapons designed to kill anything that lived, and nothing worked, because Gomul was not alive in any way they understood, and every attack seemed to make it stronger and more aware. Hyunbaek, a military advisor who had joined the team, studied the tactical records, and they made the classic mistake, he said. and they kept escalating, using bigger weapons, more force, and they never stopped to think that maybe fighting was the wrong approach. And he pointed at casualty reports that showed billions dead, and this wasn't a war, it was a slaughter. Taeyang found the records of the final decision, and a council of the remaining precursor leaders met in a bunker deep underground on a fortress world, and they debated for hours about what to do, and one faction wanted to keep fighting, while another suggested fleeing to a different galaxy entirely, but in the end they chose a third option and seal the gateway, Taeyang read, and trap it here and run. The operation cost them almost everything, and it required precursor scientists to stay behind and maintain a containment field, while everyone else evacuated and thousands volunteered, and they held the line for 6 months, while refugee ships fled toward the outer edges of precursor space, and in the end they succeeded in sealing the gateway, but at terrible cost. 50 star systems lost, Korvath said quietly, and billions dead, and our civilization broken beyond repair. And the AI showed them maps of what had been precursor territory, and vast sections were marked in red dead zones where nothing lived and where reality itself was damaged. The survivors scattered, and some went to distant galaxies while others hid in isolated systems, and a large group decided to do something different, and we chose to go home. Taeyang read from the final archive entries, and back to Earth? To the mountains and rivers we remembered from the old stories, and we chose to forget. Hana leaned forward. And forget on purpose, she asked, and Taeyang nodded and continued reading, and we will seal away all records of what we did and what we found, the Precursor Council declared, and we will let our children start fresh without the burden of our mistakes, and if they become spacefaring again, they will do it slowly and carefully, learning wisdom before they gain power. One of the final entries was a message addressed to whoever might find these archives, and Taeyang read it with tears in his eyes, and we were too proud, it said, and we reached for the stars and touched the void, and we paid the price for our arrogance, and if our children find these words, know this: you came from greatness, you fell through folly, and you can rise again, but carefully, always carefully. The research team sat in silence when the reading finished, and the weight of that ancient tragedy pressing down on them all. And Sora Im spoke first, and the sealed gateway, she said, and is it still there? Is it still holding? And Korvath answered, and yes, I can detect the containment field. It has held for 50,000 years, and the AI provided coordinates to the location. We need to make sure it stays sealed, Hyun said immediately, and if that thing ever gets out again. And he did not need to finish the sentence, and everyone understood what was at stake, and the Galactic Council would need to be informed, and a permanent monitoring station established, and the gateway could never be allowed to open. Taeyang looked at the screens showing the dead worlds marked on precursor maps, and he thought about his ancestors, who had walked those worlds and built great cities and dreamed of touching infinity, and they had achieved so much and lost so much, and in the end they had chosen to save their children by letting them forget. And now those children had returned, older and hopefully wiser, and ready to learn from the mistakes of the past. What followed was a masterclass in AI-coordinated defense, because Hana managed every system simultaneously, with shields redistributing to absorb incoming firepoint defense lasers, destroyed missiles and sensors tracked every hostile vessel, and weapons calculated firing solutions on multiple targets. The Phoenix became a fortress in space, with its shields shimmering under sustained bombardment, while its weapons methodically dismantled the attacking fleet. Rail gunshots picked off fighters. With surgical precision and plasma batteries, crippled frigates and missiles launched in carefully timed patterns that overwhelmed enemy point defenses. The pirate fleet, expecting an easy victory through numbers, instead found themselves fighting a ship that seemed to anticipate their every move, a ship that never missed and that absorbed their attacks without flinching and responded with devastating accuracy. Within 5 minutes, half the pirate fleet was destroyed, and the survivors broke formation, attempting to scatter and escape. Jihoon ordered target the command ship and disable engines but keep the hull intact, because I want prisoners. Boyan targeted Guan's cruiser with precise railgun fire, and the shots destroyed the engine section while leaving the crew compartments intact. The pirate flagship tumbled helplessly in space with atmosphere venting from hull breaches. Jihoon broadcast, "This is Phoenix to all remaining pirate vessels, and stand down immediately or be destroyed, and you have 10 seconds to comply." The remaining pirate ships cut their engines and powered down weapons. Coalition ships arrived 20 minutes later, finding the Phoenix surrounded by destroyed pirate vessels and prisoners being collected from disabled ships. Admiral Cholman's voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief when he said, "Phoenix, this is Coalition control, and we monitored the engagement. I have never seen anything like that in 40 years of military service, and you just defeated an entire pirate fleet single-handedly." Jihoon replied modestly, "We had excellent tactical intelligence and superior firepower, and the pirates chose a poor strategic approach." Cholman paused and said, "Captain Jihoon, the Coalition formally thanks you. For your service, you have accomplished in 3 weeks what we could not manage in 6 months. And the pirate threat to Kavros has been effectively eliminated." As Coalition vessels moved in to collect prisoners and secure the wreckage, Jihoon's crew celebrated their first true combat victory. But Jihoon himself was thoughtful, staring at the tactical display that showed the debris of 24 pirate ships. Nari asked, "What is wrong?" "And we won." Jihoon agreed, "We did. And now everyone in the galaxy will know what the Phoenix is capable of. That is going to bring consequences, and some good and some less." So Nari said, "You are worried about the attention." Jihoon replied, "I am worried about what comes next, because we proved that humans can take a rejected ship and turn it into something powerful. But power attracts challenges and bigger challenges." He was right to be concerned, because at that moment, halfway across the galaxy, military analysts were reviewing the sensor logs from the Kavros engagement. Intelligence agencies were compiling reports, and in the halls of power, decisions were being made about what to do about the human ship that had become too capable to ignore. Word of the Phoenix's victory spread throughout the outer territories with remarkable speed, and the story grew with each retelling. A human crew taking a derelict ship and transforming it into a vessel capable of single-handedly defeating a pirate fleet. Some accounts were accurate, and others were wildly exaggerated, and all of them had one thing in common, which was they made the Phoenix famous. The requests and offers multiplied, with defense contracts from colony worlds and security positions for trade guilds. Even military organizations extended invitations for Jihoon and his crew to join their ranks, and the financial offers were staggering. But Jihoon had begun to realize that the Phoenix represented something larger than profit. The ship was proof of concept and evidence that human ingenuity could achieve what other species deemed impossible. In a galaxy where humans were relatively new players, often dismissed as primitives, the Phoenix made a statement. Deho observed during a crew meeting, "We are becoming a symbol, and not just a ship, but an idea that is powerful. But it is also dangerous." Insu asked, "How so?" And Deho replied, "Symbols attract attention from those who want to control them or destroy them. The Phoenix has proven human capability, and now other species will either want to ally with us or neutralize what they see as a potential threat." As if to confirm these concerns, a formal message arrived from the Confederacy High Council. The message was diplomatic in tone, but clear in intent, because the Confederacy wanted to inspect the Phoenix and discuss its status as a vessel originally constructed by their civilization. Nari said flatly they want to confiscate the ship, but Jiwan corrected, they want to study it and learn how we transformed their old design into something more advanced. If they can replicate our techniques, they could upgrade their entire fleet. Jihoon read through the message carefully and said, "They are offering compensation and full price for the ship, plus consulting fees for our work. It is actually a generous offer," Boyan asked, with her voice carefully neutral. "Are you considering it?" Jihoon said, "No, but I am considering the implications of refusing." He pulled up a star map and said, "The Confederacy has been declining for decades, and their military is a shadow of what it was during their golden age. They are probably terrified that humans are developing capabilities that exceed their own." Boyan said, "Let them be terrified, because we did not do anything illegal, and we bought salvage and improved ATF that threatens them. That is their problem." Jihoon replied, "Unfortunately, their problem becomes our problem if they decide to make it one. The Confederacy still has considerable military force, and a direct confrontation would not serve anyone's interest." Soman, who had been quietly listening, spoke up and said, "What if we demonstrate cooperation without surrendering the ship, offer to share some of our technical innovations and provide consultation on their upgrade programs, but maintain ownership of the Phoenix?" Jiwan agreed that might work, and show them we are allies, not threats, Give them enough information to be satisfied without giving them everything. Ji-hoon composed a diplomatic response striking a balance between firmness and cooperation, acknowledged the Confederacy's concerns, and offered limited technical sharing, and politely but definitively declined to surrender the Phoenix. The response came 3 days later, and the Confederacy accepted his counteroffer with one condition: Ji-hoon and a small team would travel to the Confederacy core worlds to present their innovations to the military. Technical council, it was partly a diplomatic gesture and partly a summons, because refusing would be seen as an insult. Boyan said immediately, "It is a trap." Ji-hoon agreed probably, but it is also an opportunity. If we can convince the Confederacy leadership that we are valuable allies rather than threats, we buy ourselves legitimacy and protection. Boyan countered, or they seize the Phoenix, while we are in their territory and there is nothing we can do about it. Ji-hoon said that is why we are not taking the Phoenix into the core worlds. Nari, you will command the ship in my absence and stay in neutral territory. If anything goes wrong, you get the ship to safety. Nari protested and leave you behind. Ji-hoon said if necessary, yes, because the Phoenix is more important than any individual crew member, including me. The team Ji-hoon selected for the diplomatic mission was small with himself, and Taiyang and Taeyang could explain the structural innovations that made the hull superior to original specifications. Daiho could discuss the AI systems without revealing Hana's full capabilities. Ji-hoon would handle the political aspects. They traveled aboard a commercial passenger liner, leaving the Phoenix hidden in a debris field in an uninhabited system. The journey to the Confederacy core worlds took 8 days, giving them time to prepare their presentations and develop contingency plans. The Confederacy capital world was impressive, with a planet covered in towering cities that had stood for thousands of years. The orbital approaches were guarded by defense platforms and patrol fleets that, while aging, were still formidable. They were met at the spaceport by a diplomatic escort and taken directly to the Hall of Military Command, a vast complex where the Confederacy's defense strategies were planned and executed. The Technical Council consisted of 12 members representing different military branches and scientific disciplines. They listened intently as Ji-hoon and Taiyang and Daiho presented the innovations that had transformed the ship. Taiyang explained the molecular bonding techniques that allowed different alloys to integrate seamlessly. He provided schematics of the structural reinforcements that made the hull stronger. While reducing weight, Daiho discussed the power distribution networks and the advantages of AI-assisted ship operations. Though he carefully avoided revealing the full extent of Hana's capabilities, he presented the AI as simply a very sophisticated automation system, rather than a true intelligence. Ji-hoon tied it together, explaining the philosophy behind their work, taking proven designs and enhancing them with modern technology and respecting the original engineering, while not being limited by it. When the presentation concluded, the council members conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, the chairperson, who was a distinguished admiral named Dongwook, spoke. He said, "Your work is impressive, and the innovations you have described could indeed enhance our fleet capabilities." Dongwook's expression was unreadable, and he said, "You speak boldly for someone in our territory surrounded by our fleets." Daiho replied, "I speak honestly, and if you wanted to seize our ship or imprison us, you would have done so already. Instead, you invited us here for dialogue, and that suggests you are looking for solutions, not conflicts." There was a long pause, and then Dongwook made a gesture that in his culture indicated respect for a worthy opponent. He said, "You understand the game being played here better than we anticipated, and very well. The Confederacy accepts your offer of limited technical cooperation, and we will not interfere with the Phoenix or attempt to claim ownership. In exchange, you will provide consulting services to our modernization programs and maintain open communications with our military command," Ji-hoon asked. "And if other species object to this arrangement," Dongwook replied, "then they can develop their own innovations or negotiate their own agreements. Confederacy does not dictate the limits of other species' capabilities, and we simply seek to understand and adapt to changing circumstances." It was as close to an endorsement as they were likely to get, and Ji-hoon accepted the terms. The meeting concluded with a formal agreement signed by both parties as they left the Hall of Military Command. Taiyang let out a breath he had been holding and said, I thought that was going to go much worse. Ji-hoon replied it nearly did, but Dongwook is pragmatic. He recognized that trying to suppress human innovation would be futile and potentially counterproductive. Better to work with us than against us. Their return journey was uneventful, but when they reunited with the Phoenix, Nari had troubling news. She said, "While you were gone, we picked up long-range sensor data from the frontier regions. There has been an increase in military activity with Confederacy and other powers repositioning fleets. Everyone is preparing for something." Ji-hoon asked, "Preparing for what?" Nari said, "That is the question, because the diplomatic channels are silent. But the military movements tell a story. Species that have not worried about external threats in decades are suddenly fortifying their borders." Ji-won pulled up the sensor data and said it is a chain reaction. The Confederacy mobilizes to assess the Phoenix situation, and others see Confederacy movements and mobilize in response, thinking something bigger is happening. Other species see both major powers mobilizing and start their own preparations. Everyone is reacting to everyone else. Daeho said quietly, "And at the center of it all is us. The Phoenix has become a catalyst, and we proved that a small team with innovative thinking can create something that challenges established military paradigms. Now everyone is reassessing their strategic positions." Ji-hoon sat in the captain's chair processing this information. He said, "We need to demonstrate that the Phoenix is a stabilizing force, not a destabilizing one. We need another high-profile mission and something that shows we are committed to maintaining peace, not disrupting it." Nari asked, "Like what?" The answer came from an unexpected source, which was a distress signal picked up by the Phoenix's long-range sensors. It originated from a colony at the edge of contested space. Soman reported the message is fragmentary and something about an attack and multiple ships and request for immediate assistance. Boyan pointed out those people hate humans, and we have never had positive relations with them. Why would we respond to their distress call? Ji-hoon said. Because that is what defines us. We are not pirates or conquerors, and we are builders and protectors. The Phoenix was created to make the galaxy safer, not to serve only human interests. He looked around the bridge at his crew and said, "I am not ordering anyone. This is a volunteer mission, and we will be helping a species that does not like us, possibly putting ourselves in danger for people who will not thank us. Anyone who wants to sit this one out, no judgment." No one moved, and then Boyan smiled and said, "You built a warship to keep it parked. That is not how this works, Captain, and we respond to the distress call." The rest of the crew voiced their agreement, and the Phoenix altered course, accelerating toward the coordinates at maximum speed. Ji-hoon commanded Hana analyze what we know about the attack and likely threat profile. Hana said, "Based on the fragmentary transmission and the location, the most probable scenario is a raiding fleet. The colony is isolated and would be difficult for military forces to defend quickly. Estimated force composition is 20 to 40 vessels of various classes." Nari observed another pirate fleet, and after what happened at Kavros, "I am surprised they would risk it." Ji-won corrected, different pirates, and word has not spread everywhere yet, or they think they can succeed where others failed. The Phoenix covered the distance in 3 days of faster-than-light travel when they emerged. At the colony system, the situation was even worse than anticipated. The colony consisted of a terraformed moon orbiting a gas giant. 47,000 civilians lived there, supported by a modest defense station and a handful of patrol craft. The attacking force numbered 36 ships, and they were not just raiding, but conducting a systematic assault, targeting the colony's infrastructure and defensive positions. Ji-won assessed they are trying to conquer the colony, not just raid it, and this is an occupation force. Ji-hoon asked life signs. Soman reported detecting massive casualties, and the colony's main habitat dome has been breached. Thousands dead or dying. Ji-hoon said, "Then we end this now. Hana combat operations and all weapons free priority. 1 is destroy any ship targeting civilian populations. Priority 2 is neutralize the hostile fleet. Priority 3 is provide medical and emergency support to colony survivors." Hana acknowledged and said, engaging. The Phoenix dropped into the battle, like an avenging angel. The attacking ships focused on bombarding the colony below. Barely had time to register the cruiser's arrival. Before the first railgun shots began finding targets, Hana coordinated the battle with ruthless efficiency ships. Targeting civilian zones were destroyed first with their reactors punctured by kinetic slugs that left them dead in space. The command vessel took a concentrated barrage of plasma fire that overwhelmed its shields and vaporized its bridge. The remaining attackers, realizing they faced something far beyond their capabilities, attempted to retreat. The Phoenix let the small craft escape because fighters and scouts posed minimal threat. But the larger vessels that had directed the attack on civilians found themselves targeted with precision fire that disabled their FTL drives. Within 12 minutes, the assault fleet was neutralized, 16 ships destroyed, and 13 disabled and drifting, and 7 escaped into faster-than-light travel summon, broadcast on all frequencies saying medical emergency. This is the human vessel Phoenix, and we are providing humanitarian assistance to colony personnel. Any survivors, respond with your locations. The responses came in gradually with scattered groups, hiding in intact sections of the colony, rescue workers trapped under debris and medical stations, overwhelmed with casualties. Ji-hoon organized the rescue effort with military precision crew members with medical training deployed to the surface. Seok's engineering team worked to seal habitat breaches and restore life support. The Phoenix itself used its tractor beams to clear debris and stabilize damaged structures. The survivors were initially suspicious of human assistance because the cultural animosity between their species ran deep, but desperation overcame prejudice and they accepted the Phoenix crew's help. Insu worked tirelessly in a makeshift medical center, performing emergency surgery on wounded with injuries that would have been fatal without immediate intervention. His human physiology was different enough that he had to constantly adapt techniques, but his skill and determination saved dozens of lives. 3 days later, when military vessels finally arrived to secure the colony, they found the Phoenix still in orbit, its crew working alongside civilians to repair infrastructure and care for the wounded. The fleet commander, who was a grizzled officer named Young-ho, established communication with the Phoenix with obvious reluctance. He said, "Human vessel, this is Commander Young-ho, and we acknowledge your assistance to our colony. Your actions here have been noted." Ji-hoon replied simply, "Commander, we responded to a distress call and any ship would have done the same." Young-ho said quietly, "Not any ship and not for our colony. My species has not been kind to yours yet. You risked your ship and crew to save our people. This creates an obligation." Ji-hoon said, "There is no obligation, and we did what was right." There was a long pause, and then Young-ho said something that would reshape diplomatic relations. He said, "Perhaps there is more to humanity than we have acknowledged. When you return to civilized space, inform your government that we owe a debt to the crew of the Phoenix. This debt will not be forgotten." News of the Phoenix's intervention spread even faster than the Kavros victory had. The story had everything, which was ancient enemies and dramatic rescue, and human compassion overcoming interspecies prejudice within weeks. The Phoenix was no longer just a powerful warship, but a symbol of what the galaxy could be if species looked past their differences. The diplomatic repercussions were significant. Species that had viewed humans with suspicion began reassessing their positions. Trade agreements were proposed and cultural exchanges were initiated. The Phoenix had accomplished what decades of formal diplomacy could not. It had proven through action that humanity deserved a place among the galaxy's civilized species. Not everyone celebrated because in the shadows of galactic politics, there were those who saw the Phoenix's success as a threat to the established order.